an eternal optimist.
Morning, everyone. We are now live on YouTube and we are also recorded on WebEx.
Thank you. So good morning. This is Bruce Weir and welcome to the February 4th meeting 2022 of the DNA Subcommittee. Today's meeting is entirely by video conferencing, combination of the pandemic and the weather. So welcome to everybody. Dr. Dooley, I understand you have a few words to say before we begin.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Weir. At this time, I would like to speak about the new commissioner of Dcjs and chair of the Commission on Forensic Science, Rosanna Rosado. Commissioner Rosado joined Dcjs in December after serving as New York's Secretary of State since 2016. During her time at the Department of State, she was a key member of the governor's administration and carried out many significant initiatives, including social justice reform, as well as economic and community revitalization across the state. Commissioner Rosado has also been at the forefront of the state's reentry and reintegration efforts for justice involving people and led the Council on Community Reentry and Reintegration of New Yorkers. And now I would just like to turn it over to our new Executive Deputy Commissioner, Joe Popkin, who would like to also say a few words. Joe.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dooley, Dr. Weir, and other members of the subcommittee. On behalf of Commissioner Rosado, who has testified 3 times in front of 4 committees over the last 2 weeks, I just wanted to say a warm welcome and thank you for all of your service to the DNA subcommittee and to the larger commission. You know, the commissioner and I both started 9 weeks ago. And in that time, we've had an opportunity to speak with Jill and Shelley and other members and participate in the Commission on Forensic Science. And the work that you all do brings an unparalleled amount of integrity to the process of our oversight and really establishes what I think is a nation-leading program here in New York State. So thank you for all of your service and the service to the people of New York State. It does not go unnoticed nor unappreciated. And I will turn the meeting back over and get out of the way. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Popkin. We're sorry that Commissioner Rosado could not join us, but we're very pleased you can, and we hope you'll stay as long as your duties allow you this morning. So we look forward to working with you. It's, I think we all enjoy our service on this committee. It is important, and I congratulate the state of New York for having such a commission. I think it is certainly nation-leading. So we're going to conduct our business with a roll call this morning to make sure we capture the votes. So I'll first of all ask everybody to state their name and reply present as we take this to establish a quorum. So I'm Bruce Weir, and I'm here. Dr. Beaver.
Fred Beaver, present.
Thank you. Dr. Eastman.
Allison Eastman, present.
Thank you. Dr. Kidd, I believe, is absent. Dr. Smith.
Jennifer Smith, good morning.
Thank
Present.
you. Thank you. Dr. Souza.
Amanda Souza, present.
Thank you. And Dr. Gettings.
Catherine Gettings, present.
Thank you. So I believe we've established a quorum. So let's move on to review and approval of the meeting agenda. So you've all received a draft agenda of today's meeting. Is there any discussion regarding the agenda? Thank you. So hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda for this meeting? A motion, please.
Move.
Dr. Eastman, a second. Second to the motion to approve the agenda.
I second.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And so any other discussion on the let's proceed to a vote. So when I call you, please state your vote. My vote is aye. Dr. Beaver.
Fred Beaver, aye.
Dr. Eastman.
Allison Eastman, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Smith.
Jennifer Smith, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Souza.
Amanda Souza, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Gettings.
Catherine Gettings, aye.
Thank you. So the motion carries. So now moving on to the review and approval of the draft minutes from our last meeting, November 5, 2021. You've all received draft minutes of the meeting. Is there any discussion regarding these minutes? All right, everybody's happy with those. Very good. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes, please?
I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And second,
Second,
Second
Catherine
it.
Giddings.
I didn't get it. Who got this first? Dr. Eastman, I'll say. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Again, I'll call on your vote. My vote is aye. Dr. Beaver.
Fred Beaver, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Eastman.
Allison Eastman, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Dcjs. Dr. Smith.
Jennifer Smith, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Souza.
Amanda Sozer, aye.
Dr. Giddings.
Catherine Giddings, aye.
Thank you, sir. The motion carries. So now we're moving into a series of reports from the laboratories. The Monroe County Crime Lab. We have an email chain. We have a letter regarding the FBI approval of the 2020 external QAS. The FBI reviewed the external QAS and had a few follow-up questions. The lab provided the requested information. The FBI considers the laboratory to be in compliance with the QAS requirements. Gail Conkin, I think, from the lab is available. Does she have anything she wishes to say to us? Ms. Conklin. I guess not. So there was no action required on our part, so that was information. So that seems to be fine. Nassau County Division of Forensic Services, we have a letter dated 11/10/21 regarding continuation of accreditation, and then a later letter of January 6th this year regarding a scope expansion with the scope and report. So ANAB issued its continuation of accreditation from the surveillance activity in the fall. The lab had a scope expansion assessment with no findings to add a non-biology discipline. Current scope of accreditation and expansion are attached to our documents. So we have Karen Dooling and Pat Bufalino possibly available. Do they wish to say anything to us from Nassau County? I gather not. I believe we don't have the New York City OCME person available just now. Is that correct?
Someone may be available for this. The presentation later is a different person. Meredith is available, I know. And Kira McKay may be on as well, but
okay, very good. Okay, so let's move on then to the New York City OCME. We have a letter from November 12 regarding continuation of accreditation. Surveillance report certificate and scope. Email from January 7th of this year regarding submission of external QAS to the FBI. The laboratory underwent a surveillance assessment, scope expansion, and external QAS in the fall of 2021. There were no findings. The lab remains in compliance with its accreditation standards. ANAB has provided updated accreditation certification and scope document. The lab has submitted the external QAS to the FBI. So if anyone from the New York City OCME wishes to say anything to follow up at this point,
I have a question for them concerning their QAS audit.
please go ahead.
This is Allison.
Yeah.
Again, it has to do with validation 8.2.1.
Could you give us a page number?
That would be our page 48 and their page, well, on the actual document, it would be page 24 of the actual QAS document. But it's the red 48.
Before you get into the question, do we have someone who could hear you from OCME, just to confirm?
Hi, this is Kira McKay. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Kira.
Okay, the question I have is with 8.2.1, this validation, this section is with pertaining to the massively parallel sequencing validation for mitochondrial DNA sequencing?
Yes, I believe that's what they're referring to when
Okay.
they filled that out.
My question is I thought because Monroe County had that interaction with the help desk, clarifying 8.2.1, I believe it was. And now I'm confused because you have not applicable for characterization of the genetic marker. Now, this is with regards to supporting developmental validation studies that had been conducted previous to your internal validation. That's the way I interpret this. So there must be developmental validation studies available on characterization of the genetic marker. I mean, consider the mito sequence a genetic marker, unless that's incorrect. Same with population studies. I mean, there have been population studies on DNA sequencing using massively parallel sequencing.
For the letter A, I would have interpreted that since it's the sequence of the mitochondrial genome, that it would not have been considered a genetic marker. That's why I thought they put NA. For the population studies.
But there are population studies.
Yeah, but I think those are from previous times, not applicable to this specific QAS. No, haven't we discussed this before? Shelley, am I misremembering?
No, not for this one, but supporting developmental validation studies have done population studies, mitochondrial DNA sequencing in various populations. So wouldn't that be yes? Going back to Monroe County and their conversation with the help desk. See, these things drive me crazy, especially the section on validation. I find it not very user-friendly, at least not for me anyway. But they say for 8.2.1, 8.2.1 guidance, developmental validation studies are required for all validations being reviewed, regardless of whether they were performed by a laboratory or performed by an external agency, either commercial vendor or another laboratory. If a laboratory is relying upon an externally performed developmental validation, the citations and publications addressing the elements must be available and accessible. So wouldn't that be, like for population studies, wouldn't that be a yes?
I mean, my view is that it would be how the QAS team interprets the QAS.
Which may not necessarily be correct. I don't know, because anyway, I just wanted to comment on that. I mean, that's my interpretation, is that there are supporting developmental validation studies on population studies. So that would be yes. And I guess it depends on whether you consider the mitochondrial sequence that you're looking at as a genetic marker. It doesn't have to be a gene. A sequence can be a marker, a non-gene. That's my comment anyway.
We also do have call-in user number 9. Raise their hand. I'm going to go ahead and unmute them.
Anybody wishing to speak?
Caller 9.
Sorry about that. This is Meredith from the New York City OCME DNA lab. I'm just wondering if this particular audit team was viewing those standards as the laboratory itself did not do the developmental, and so therefore it was not applicable. I know that's been a point that has been debated quite a bit. So we're basically just going based on how the audit team is viewing the standards and how they determine these things. We didn't think that this was a point to contest with them.
Well, I mean, it's just my comment. It's just every time I see this, it's done differently. But based on what they said to Monroe County, my understanding is that these are all of the things that were done in a developmental validation study upon which your laboratory is depending to support your internal validation. But it's just my comment. I may actually send another email to the help desk. They take forever to get back to me, but they do eventually respond.
So is it clear that this process has been completed with all final FBI approvals or not?
No, not yet. This is just
Okay.
the submission. I would say based on what Monroe County experienced, that if they may hear from the help desk if that's necessary to and go through the same chain of emails.
I think Dr. Eastman's point's quite valid. A sequence is a genetic marker, and there certainly have been populations. So it does seem like a thing that should be looked into. I don't think we'll spend any more time on it, Dr. Eastman, but thanks.
We look at so many QAS documents. Every time I read it, there's like another thing that I'm not sure that I thought I understood, and then I don't understand.
All right.
And I've actually had training on it.
Thank you. I think your point's valid. Any further comments on the OCME report? There we go. All right. So we'll move on then to Onondaga County, letter dated November 9, regarding FBI acceptance of the 2020 external QAS, letter dated November 8, 2021, continuation of accreditation with scope. The FBI has completed its review of the 2020 external QAS and finds the lab to be in compliance with the standards. Additionally, ANAB has issued a continuation of accreditation letter and scope document. The surveillance report with no findings was reviewed by our committee at our November meeting. So we have Renee Ho, Kathleen Hung available to speak if they wish.
Renee, you're unmuted.
Go ahead, Ms. Ho. No. Very well. So we have no action item that we're required to do, so the report seems to be fine. Thank you. Moving on to Suffolk County, we have a letter dated January 7th this year regarding the renewal of accreditation, attached documentation, an email chain regarding the status of remediations, extension of accreditation to complete the remediations, and a successful completion of all the remediation notifications. So that is good. And then a letter from January 13th regarding the FBI acceptance of the 2021 external QAS. So we have available to speak, Helen Wong and others. If anybody from Suffolk County wishes to speak, this would be a good time. We do have a vote required for this action. So let me just review the situation. The laboratory has remediated all the findings from the August reaccreditation assessment. The subcommittee reviewed all the biology-related objective evidence at its November meeting. ANAB has issued full reaccreditation. In addition to the final documentation, you will have seen ANAB briefly extended the expiration date of the previous cycle due to the holidays and just delay in reviewing the evidence provided. The FBI has reviewed and accepted the 2021 external QAS document. Do I have a motion? Do I have a motion to accept a binding recommendation to the Commission on Forensic Science to renew the New York State accreditation of the Suffolk County Crime Laboratory in the discipline of biology for the time period concurrent with the ANAB accreditation to expire December 31, 2025. Do I have such a motion?
So moved. It's Jennifer, Dr. Smith.
Dr. Smith, thank you. And a second?
Second, Catherine Giddings.
Dr. Giddings, thank you. So I'll call upon you for your votes. My vote is aye. Dr. Beaver?
Fred Beaver, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Eastman?
Allison Eastman, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Giddings?
Catherine Giddings, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Kidd is absent. Dr. Smith?
Dr. Smith, aye.
Thank you. And Dr. Souza.
Amanda Souza, aye.
Thank you. So the motion carries. So thank you. Moving on to the New York State Police Crime Lab, a reassessment report dated January 28, 2022. No vote is required. The ANAB conducted a full reassessment in January. The lab received 2 findings. There was one concerning DNA reports in which not all results were clear and unambiguous, specifically the presence of a minor profile in a mixture, and another finding concerning latent prints, not DNA. So the lab has until March 29 of 2022 to develop and implement a corrective action plan. I think probably we should hear from someone at the lab. Ray Wickenheiser, are you available on the call?
Julie, you're unmuted.
This is Julie Pizzichetti.
Julie, oh, thank you, Julie. Yeah, welcome. So do you want to just give us a little bit of more background about this, please?
Sure. So the finding was under ANAB 7.8.1.2, where the assessor noted that in DNA, the laboratory does not report all results in a manner that is clear and unambiguous. Specifically, when the laboratory reports the presence of a minor profile as part of a mixture, it does not specify whether the minor profile is suitable for comparison. So just as some background, in October of 2021, we switched to a more streamlined report format. We were trying to reduce reworks caused by people forgetting to put like an S on items and things like that. We were also trying to make the reports more easily understood by our customers, the law enforcement agencies and the prosecutors. So we were trying to reduce the amount of technical language and also focus on the most important elements that we felt needed to be communicated in terms of whether a major contributor of the evidence was suitable for comparison. So we had at that point taken out any reference to the minor, but we certainly did understand the assessor's comment. The wording that we had switched to last October was, for example, results are consistent with at least 2 donors, with the major contributor being an unknown male donor, John Doe. This evidence can be used for comparison. So what we've already implemented is essentially a switch back to our previous wording. So we've already had a WebEx meeting with our staff. We instituted protocol changes. We actually held reports that had that language and are having them redone with our new language, and we will be completing the non-conformity resolution workflow. Just indicated that we did respond to the finding by adding information back that the assessor felt should be in there. So for example, our revised wording, which again is switching back to what we used to say, is the major contributor to this evidence is suitable for further comparison. The remainder of this evidence is not suitable for further comparison due to insufficient genetic information. So we just, again, reverted essentially back to our previous report conclusions and added the information that was documented in our lab case file regarding the minor contributor as to whether it was insufficient for comparison.
Thank you. Are there ever situations where we do want to proceed with the minor contributor, if that was a person of interest? I mean, is it possible for you to conduct some analyses on the minor contributor?
Oh, yes, we would use a different conclusion if the minor was not insufficient or if the minor was not too complex. We would say the evidence is suitable for further comparison. We would make it clear that it's the profile, and it would also state something like the mixture profile is consistent with DNA from 2 donors. This evidence is suitable for further comparison. So we're just specifying clearly specifying what portion of a profile is suitable for comparison. And then also, again, adding in whether there's a minor component that is unsuitable and then specifying the reason.
So it's not the fact that it's a minor contributor that makes it unsuitable per se. It's with have enough information there. I mean, you can certainly interpret.
Oh yeah, we absolutely will. You know, if we have a major contributor and an interpretable minor, we would state that in our conclusion. I mean, the assessor had focused in on a very specific type of conclusion that was a mixture with a minor donor. So that's what we're responding to with our remediation.
Thank you. Any other questions for Julie on the committee?
Julie, can I ask a question? Have you guys already developed and submitted your corrective action plan as of right now, or are you still, I know this was just last week, so.
We will be doing that, yes. I mean, we wanted to focus on, because we actually clearly recognize what the assessor had been citing, and we had reports that we didn't want to hold up that had the wording that the assessor felt didn't give enough information. So what we wanted to focus on this week is actually reinstituting the report conclusions that included that additional information, so we could move forward with the reports and then update our protocols. So we will next week start actually formalizing our response, which we've essentially already done, and submit that remediation documentation to ANAB.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, that's good. All right, further comments? All right, thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
So we have no further action here. So moving on to old business, Dr. Dooley, any update on partial matches?
Since the last meeting, there has been no change for partial match. We're still at 93 names requested, 49 names released, and all 49 investigations have been closed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving on then to familial search updates. Any update there?
Yeah, so we've received a total of 51 applications with 8 resubmissions, 2 renewals. So that makes for 41 unique applications. Of those, 35 have been approved, 13 have been rejected, 2 withdrawn, and 1 is currently in process. The 35 that were approved, we have 8 that are in queue in process, and 27 have been completed.
Any questions for Dr. Dooley about the partial match and familial search? So you're not running into any difficulties apparently. Very good, thank you. So CODIS bulletins. Apparently Tom Leach has notified the OFS that there have been no relevant CODIS bulletins at this time. No update on that, I assume. Nothing from CODIS. Very good. So an interesting item is next on our agenda concerning mixture interpretation. Commission member Jessica Goldthwaite has provided a letter regarding mixture interpretation and the discussion going on in the country around the draft NIST report. Dr. Dooley, can you give us some insight about this, the background, the letter, and the Commission's position at their December meeting, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So it was a topic of discussion that was raised at the September Commission meeting, in where there was a motion made that did not get a second or carry to basically have a moratorium on the use of PGS on complex mixtures. So Commission member Jessica Goldthwaite drafted a letter and sent it to the Commission, which we did speak about it in the December meeting, and also addressed you as well, this group as well. So we're providing it to you. And I just want to take time to note that, you know, again, this is in reference to the NIST report where now public comments have been released, but it's still not a final document. So I'm not certain if any action to take on this, if there would be any, it would be premature as there isn't a final paper at this time. You know, there is a very lengthy request on behalf of the labs and what data that she would like to see being tracked. I'm really not certain as to what action we could take at this time, considering, again, we don't have the final NIST report. So I don't know if anyone else would like to speak on it.
Yeah, I've got just a couple of comments. I think this is very interesting and it's an important area. The NIST report is not finalized, so I agree it's premature. But there's a great deal of mention in the commissioner's letter about the IEEE recommendations on software validation. I think it's premature for us to get into that at this point. There was some, I think, some statements in the IEEE report that I don't think are accurate concerning the nature of probabilistic genotyping and commercial packages. I don't think they are artificial intelligence in the sense they make a decision. Forensic scientists use these tools to make quantitative statements about strength. Not make a decision on the ultimate question. So that gives me pause. But I think it does give me pause, but I think it's way soon for us to take any further action. We'll see what the NIST report ends up doing and then consider our so I certainly welcome other discussion.
Bruce, this is Amanda Sozer. Do we know when that report is scheduled to come out?
No, I don't think so. Unless somebody knows better, I don't think we do.
No, I mean, they did release however many 400 and something pages worth of public comments, I believe. So
yeah,
quite some time, I'm sure it'll be to review.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Smith.
Dr. Smith. First of all, I absolutely thank you so much for those comments. I think you're spot on. It was fascinating reading, and I also want to thank Jill and team for sending it to us so we could be aware of some of the noise that is circulating. That was the most fascinating letter I've read in a long time from a bunch of engineers. So I just want to throw that out there. But one thing that I just wanted, as a relatively newer member of the committee, and I think it goes to the comments we started off with, you know, it is unusual that New York has taken these steps to really review procedures like probabilistic genotyping. And whereas the NIST report may go out and it may be, you know, new news to some states or some jurisdictions, I think New York has taken the time because we do have this subcommittee. You do review a lot of things. So just kind of in the back of my head, would it be feasible, Jill, for you to kind of maybe just send us, if we weren't there, what was the review of probabilistic genotyping? You know, what's sort of the history here in New York? And because I think it would be helpful when all of this lands that people have an appreciation, at least in this state, of the amount of review that was done by external folks. So it wasn't just the laboratories coming up with this, putting it online, but it actually, because New York is unusual in that it has taken these steps. So I just wondered if, I don't want it to be too onerous, but just a brief summary of, you know, presentations were made or something like that. And, or can you point me to maybe the minutes of those meetings? Because I don't want you guys to have to necessarily do new work. But I think as we prepare for whatever happens, if we do get a tasking, it'd be good that people understand that there was a process already to review this very important tool and to include all the work that we did, last summer, or, you know, when some of the issues were raised. So it's just a request. I don't want it to be onerous. So that would be helpful to me to.
I think we can definitely provide the videos or the timestamps for the videos for where that's done. You know, we do memorialize and we do a great job. Team does a great job of memorializing all of that, so we can do that. And I would like to also note that it is important for us to just take pause on this letter, and there are a couple of inaccuracies that are in there, and also the missing points of the FBI QAS audits and the ANAB audits that look at all validations during all of their activities. So if any updates are done, those are reviewed by those bodies as well. And then again, that would come to the subcommittee for a binding recommendation to go to the commission every time. So we can definitely do that. I do think, I believe I said this in the December commission meeting as well. to inundate you with the materials that we have received from the laboratories, which again, thank you laboratories for being gracious enough to provide us with your SOPs and your validations, until there's a direction in which you can evaluate those voluminous documents with a final NIST report, we just didn't want to forward those. So I don't want it to seem as if the labs are not in compliance with this. They did provide those. And again, we said this in the December commission meeting. Our office is just holding them because I think to begin reviewing something without a direction in which to review it, it just doesn't make sense for your time. And, you know, we know your time is valuable. So I just wanted to also say that.
Fred Bieber here. I have a quick question.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Fred.
I have a question, I guess, for Jill. The letter from the Legal Aid Society dated November 30th, that's directed to both the commission and the subcommittee. So this letter isn't coming from the commission to us asking us to do anything. I want to make that clear in my mind. This is coming from the Legal Aid Society.
Correct.
And Jessica's signature on here is as a member of the Legal Aid Society, not a member of the Forensic Commission. Am I correct?
I think she does sign it as a commissioner of the Commission on Forensic Science, but it does not speak for the commission in totality.
Right.
You know, no action was taken for us to draft a letter to give you guys action to take at the subcommittee from a commission standpoint. So yes, that's right.
Yeah, but I think that clarification is important. So this, we're not obliged to do anything with this letter any more than if it came from a group in Kansas or Texas, are we?
Correct. It's more for informational purposes that you have when you are reviewing the final report. You'll have something to look at, but no, you're not required to do anything with that letter.
I have some sympathy. Thanks, Fred. I have some sympathy with Jennifer's comments, though. I think I'm also relatively new to this committee and wasn't here when the original validation and adoption of the techniques were being discussed. So it's comforting to know that there is a paper trail. I'd be much more comfortable with a paper trail than a video trail, to be honest. But I don't think it's urgent. But if we are to enter into any further discussions, we will certainly need access to those original documents. And the fact that they're available is good. I mean, I'd be quite happy to start reading through them. I think it'll be interesting. So that this is not, I don't think it is urgent, but it would be very helpful, I think. Any further discussion on this?
I have a couple of comments.
Go ahead.
I think she made some good points in this letter. And I'm not just sticking to issues with probabilistic genotyping, but things like accessibility of validations and accessibility of SOPs for anybody to review. And some labs do post them at their websites, but I looked at the 8 DNA labs here in New York, and the only one that I could find that actually I could find the SOPs was New York City. Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. They posted their validations and their SOPs. Just speaking from as New York State, if it's possible some of the other ones, but I couldn't find any links to any SOPs. I also think that there's a real issue with proficiency testing. The proficiency testing are not sufficiently challenging to assess the laboratory's ability to do mixture interpretations. And test their software and their SOPs that they develop from their software validations. So I don't, I mean, some of these things I think could be improved in New York. And I think she brought up some things that would be good ways to improve things in New York. The thing about, I know she listed a bunch of things that she thought should be tracked. I think most labs track most of this through their LIM system.
Not all the labs have LIM systems, though. I think that's important to note.
True,
that not all of them have LIM systems, and not all of them are set up to kind of retain this data, which would then imply that they would need to work with their LIMS provider to program and then have these things done. It's a very lengthy list, in my opinion. As a former lab employee, this is a big push and would require resources in order to be able to provide this data. So,
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, but I'm sure some labs do. I don't know if any lab does all of those things, but some of these things that she mentioned, I think they're already doing. I think, and yeah, I agree. Let's wait for the final report on the mixture interpretation to come out. But this, this could be a very huge and lengthy bunch of work to review all of the laboratories, probabilistic genotyping and SOPs. And I'm assuming that this also includes other SOPs like DNA extraction and, all of their SOPs. We never review their SOPs. The only time we ever see their SOPs is if there is a corrective action involving an SOP so that it ends up being part of the documentation provided to us in our meeting materials. Otherwise, we don't review SOPs every 3 years or whatever.
No, I think part of the accreditation process. That's part of what they would do. Something else I just want to. So
there's another thing I want to mention as I watched the commission meeting, and they mentioned that the review of validations, the minimum requirement is 1 review of a validation study, and that will grant it approval if the reviewer approves it. 1 person reviewing the validation study. It's not 2 independent reviews. What gets 2 independent reviews are the academic credentials and training documents. I think it should at least be reversed. I think validation studies should get 2 independent reviews. From a recent experience, looked at a validation study that was approved, but there was data missing. I don't know how reviewing the validation study summary could not understand completely exactly what was done because data was missing. And so, I mean, when you consider the amount of work that auditors and assessors have to do during an audit or an assessment, it's difficult to do a real thorough review of a validation study of the size of a probabilistic genotyping validation study. I mean, that's probably, I guess, one of the more expansive types of validation studies that require that take much more work to review. So I don't know. I mean, I agree with some of the points in this letter, and I'm also concerned that if we get I know all the labs aren't doing probabilistic genotyping at this point, but we would probably be getting at least 3 or 4 validation studies, and I'm assuming we would get the raw data too, and all the SOPs. That's a lot of work, and
let me just
unless I'm misunderstanding what is being asked.
So thanks, Dr. Reisman. So this is important. I'm very concerned about your statements that the proficiency tests are not adequate, and I wouldn't want that to go without remark or without challenge. That was a very strong statement. Did you want to clarify what you meant?
Yeah, well, the proficiency tests do not provide complex mixtures. They're fairly straightforward, single source, maybe 2, I don't know, maybe 3, but they're not as sufficiently challenging to test the analyst's interpretation of complex mixtures.
So, thanks for that, but I've got to point out this.
Unless the lab's making their own.
No, this is a very strong statement. I don't think it has substance in that. I don't see an example of a proficiency test which is inadequate. I don't know. You could be right, but I think we need to be careful about making blanket condemnations without some more detail. The other thing about the validation, that's an important point. I agree. Maybe the time to address that is when we see it. We have a validation report come to us for approval or for noting. It seems to me that you're asking for a change in very widespread procedures, maybe going beyond New York State, I don't know. But these are large issues, and I welcome some other discussion following up on Dr. Eastman's comments.
Hi, this is Dr. Smith, and to implement some of these things would take financing and money and sources of money that's the question. I actually found in the engineering letter something that was very interesting. One of the last recommendations they made was for money to be made available. And I think practically speaking, I take your points that before we make wide-sweeping recommendations, tracking things, of compiling data. I mean, one frustration is validation studies can take 2 years to compile in these more complex validation efforts, especially for those first laboratories that are going through it. And yet, there's this expectation that the review of this, by just posting them online for anyone to look at and anyone to comment on, is then of value. That most laboratories would be willing, I think, to post as much as they could if they could afford to do it. If they have the manpower, the software, the storage. Nobody's trying to hide their validation studies. It's just these current ones are voluminous and complex. And quite honestly, in some of our fields, as these new things come off, it's difficult to find reviewers with the background to come in and do that review. So this is going to take a lot of financing to have this nirvana of oversight that is recommended in some of these letters. And I think that's just something we can't go. What we should start to applaud are the efforts by states like New York, who is at least taking steps to have outside review. To Jill's point, auditors come in to do audits, and that's a legitimate, recognized process for part of review. So again, I think there's lots of great recommendations sometimes, but with no funding behind it, they're unfunded mandates. And then they create, I think, unfair noise in the judicial system. And that's what we as a committee have to be careful of, that we don't make more noise that puts a burden on a laboratory that's already, really trying to show, what's going on under the covers. So that's one reason why, Jill, if you have a chance, there has been some thorough vetting of probabilistic genotyping in New York. So I think we need to keep making sure people hear that history. So thanks.
Any other comments?
I just want to go back to something that Allison initially said before it vacates my brain, which is the availability of validations and SOPs. One of the terms we always say is New York is a special snowflake, and we are, but New York City is an even more special snowflake in the fact that they have separate city laws that require them, I believe, to make them publicly available, whereas the rest of the state does not. So in order for those to become publicly available, it would have to be at the will of the laboratory to want to do that, or regulatory change. And currently there's not that. So I do just want to say that it's not the expectation that the labs have to provide all of this, because there's nothing saying they have to. The note is taken, but there's no authority to do so. It would require regulatory change. That's it.
I think also, but back to what Jennifer said, in light of this NIST report, maybe there will be more funding available for laboratories to address more, to be able to address some of the concerns about mixture studies and about tracking of data and stuff like that. I mean, the NIST study is probably doing a big favor, in that respect. Well, we'll see, but.
Any other comments? Dr. Bieber, do you have anything to add to this discussion?
Well, there are literally hundreds of pages of response to the NIST initial draft, and Fred Bieber, Bruce Badoli, Mike Coble are co-authors of one of those responses. And I think until and unless we, the editorial, we have digested many of those and then missed follow-up next draft, if there will be a next draft or a final report, it's impossible for us to make direct sense of Jessica's letter and the IEEE letter that she added to that. I'm a little concerned, I have to say, Mr. Chairman, with the letter from Jessica, in that I'm wondering aloud. I'm not stating this as an opinion, but I wonder if there's a bit of a conflict here, because she's writing on the letterhead of the Legal Aid Society, which tries in many instances to keep forensic evidence out of court, yet her sign-off is Commissioner of New York State Commission of Forensic Sciences. So I hope she's not, I'm a little confused. Is she representing herself as a commissioner, directing us as a subcommittee to take action? Or is she representing herself as a staff advocate for the Legal Aid Society? So I find this a bit of almost a conflict here, a conflict of interest. And I'm puzzled by that. I'm concerned about it, quite honestly. And I think, therefore, our subcommittee should take no action whatsoever on either her letter or the IEE report.
Thank you. Fred, did you have any comments on Alison Eastman's remarks, which I think are important, but are very strong about the...
Yeah, I would take 3 steps back from, with due respect to Alison, because I have seen some of these mixtures. I've been asked to review them for other labs, and I think they're reasonable. So, you know, I don't think labs need to try to assess a 6-person mixture on a knife to demonstrate that they're capable of making good decisions about mixtures. So I would probably echo your comments, Dr. Weir.
Dr. Weir, can I just ask a question, maybe?
Please, thank you.
Just, part of the tasking of the subcommittee is to, and I just pulled the law up about proficiency tests after I read that letter, and it's to include the adoption and implementation of internal and external proficiency testing programs, if possible, a blind external proficiency testing program for forensic laboratories performing forensic DNA testing. And in light of the commissioner's comment earlier in the meeting about maintaining unparalleled integrity, I'm wondering if at our next meeting, we could have someone present what proficiency tests are being used for the probabilistic genotyping.
I think that'd be nice. Who would be the appropriate person?
I'm not sure.
The appropriate group.
Sorry, Jill, but I mean, I think that would be, because that's clearly part of our charge. It's in 13, I guess, item 13, it's number or it's letter C. And, you know, I think that when the DNA subcommittee was looking at proficiencies, we should regularly evaluate that for any new technology that's coming on by a laboratory. So I think that, you know, I don't have an answer for my request, but I think that might be helpful to us in ensuring that there are appropriate proficiency tests.
So just from an accreditation standpoint and a thought here, you know, the commission and the subcommittee have agreed to the ANAB accreditation program as the accreditation program for our laboratories. The labs then have their proficiency programs and schedules and align with their ISO and ANAB accreditation. So I'm wondering if you want to hear from each individual lab then to their proficiency schedules, if that's something, Or if, you know, understanding that ANAB is reviewing these when they do their assessments, do we want to hear from ANAB? This is a big ask, and I'm trying to hone in on what part of the proficiency program you're looking for, because
I think I'm interested in what proficiency is being done for that includes probabilistic genotyping.
So at each lab's level, what their proficiency test schedule looks like and what proficiency tests they're using.
I just think as far as it includes probabilistic genotyping, you know, like I don't think we need to know overall, like serology, we're not asking for that. But
understood. So we need to look at their scopes of accreditation and which labs would be using that, and then ask those labs to provide their.
Yeah, and I looked at the scope, maybe someone else can verify this, but when I looked at the scope of accreditation, I didn't see probabilistic genotyping as a different scope. And I may be wrong, I may have missed it.
It wouldn't be, because it's a part of DNA typing. It's an interpretive tool. So why would it be set aside? I mean, it's not the holy grail. It's your ability to interpret a mixture and what tool you decide to use to interpret that mixture. So it goes within the field of DNA typing call. And before we go down this rabbit hole, I don't believe there are any external providers approved by to give an external proficiency test, including probabilistic genotyping. Again, it's a tool. So before we ask the labs or put them in this box where there's some mandatory or, you know, mandating them to do something that includes probabilistic genotyping, I don't even think there's a source for them to go to buy the test. And this is exactly some of the conversations we've had at SWGDAM kind of for NIST to talk about proficiency testing. Who's going to provide proficiency tests for this community when these mandates come out? So we can't put the cart before the horse right now. So I think these discussions, we need to go very gingerly into these discussions, because it's going to be misconstrued that if there isn't a proficiency test, then labs therefore aren't proficient. And I think that's a very dangerous conversation.
Well, I'm just looking at our mandate. You know, I'm looking at the mandate that we have. I'm listening to what the commissioner said about unparalleled integrity, and I'm trying to figure out maybe a solution. You know, maybe the DNA subcommittee can kind of think about something that would address that concern in a cost, you know, in a manner. I don't know, maybe there's no answer, but I think we should at least think about it based on our mandate.
Dr. Giddings, we haven't heard from you in this discussion. Did you have anything to add?
Sure, on the proficiency test, yeah, and we have talked about this at SWGDAM too in terms of NGS typing, for example. Like that's another data point for it, where there isn't. I mean, you can do NGS typing and submit results to a proficiency test provider for length-based STR alleles, and they'll evaluate the length-based, but there isn't a way to give them the sequence. Like there might be a comment field where you could put sequences in just to note your sequences, but they're not going to evaluate those. So I think it's similar. You know, even if there was a complex mixture, I don't think that the test providers would have a way to even assess whether your result is correct. They'd have to have some bounds of what they're expecting to see there. From my sense of talking to the providers, they're not set up to do that, and they wouldn't do it unless labs just refuse to buy their tests otherwise. So I think, yeah, I just don't know what labs are supposed to do about it.
So some of this may be similar to for relationship testing laboratories. They, you know, some of these complex kinship calculations that they do, the proficiency testing provider will have what they call a paper challenge, where the laboratory assesses their ability some way. It may not be, you know, it's part of the whole process. But I think as far as our mandate goes and a new technology, that we need to start thinking about how we could do this for New York State. I don't, you know, what that looks like, I don't know, but there are a lot of smart people that are on this meeting right now, and the commission as well. But I think that that's something we may want to take on.
I think that it would be instructive, I guess, to see, I mean, there are only a couple of test providers, right? And there's only a couple of tests per year that even include mixtures, I would assume. So to see one example of from each provider of what was possible that a lab could have even gotten their hands on in the past year. And just seeing the test itself doesn't really tell us. We need to see one set of results, right? To see what type of mixture came out of that test. I think that could be useful if, if it's a 1 to 3, a really simple 2-person mixture, then would we look at that and say, well, that's not sufficient? Or would we say it's not possible to make something complex and then actually judge the result of it? But without, like, off the top of my head, I don't know what labs are getting right now or what they have access to right now.
So, Catherine or Alison or someone, can we formulate something concrete here? I think it's a big issue. But certainly I don't know what the proficiency testing details are in general, but it's certainly not in the probabilistic genotyping. So, is that a very discrete ask? What are the labs doing? If they're not doing anything, they could just simply say that. But what are they doing? That might be valuable.
I don't mean proficiency tests necessarily specifically for probabilistic genotyping. Some labs don't do probabilistic genotyping.
Mm-hmm.
But to get something that is, similar to some of the more complex mixtures that the laboratory encounters, and they use their methods, whether they be manual or software, and how they interpret it. And some labs, if they're doing manual, may not be able to interpret the entire profile and might only pick out a major if they can pick out a major and interpret that. So it's just, but if they're just getting 2 or maybe even 3-person mixtures, to challenge when they routinely do more complex mixtures than that, I think it would be good to know whether they're getting adequate proficiency testing.
So
on that.
you're general in the sense it has to do with mixture interpretation. How are analysts currently being tested for their ability to interpret mixtures?
Yes.
And so
using whatever their protocols are.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fine. Jill, is this a before we formalize anything, is this a sensible ask? And I don't know if it needs to go to every lab. Maybe just one representative.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around what we're asking at this point. I'm not going to lie.
It's not just you, Jill. I mean, are you asking this based on the letter from Jessica?
I think that's planted the seed, but I think it goes beyond the letter.
Because I was going to say, you're asking something based on something that she wrote, which didn't come from the commission. It just came from, at this point, it's just a member of the public. So if we're making the lab of this work based on this.
So maybe, this is Amanda, maybe someone could just help me in explaining. If someone has a concern, does that go to the commission and then the commission sends it to the DNA subcommittee? Is that the way that it would work? I want to make sure I'm not making a recommendation that is outside of our swim lane.
The way the law is written, it says, the subcommittee can advise the commission on any matters, regarding quality assurance or any matters referred to it by the commission. So it seems like you guys could recommend things to the commission on your own. But for this particular matter on something, 1, the NIST report isn't final, and 2, it's coming from someone, general public, based on a report that's not final. She has all these questions, and I think it's still premature. We should wait until everything's finalized, and then we can look at this letter, if you wish, and see if there are any concerns. Because you're making the labs do something based on something that's not final, and you may not need to when the final report comes out. I don't want to make them jump through hoops for something that they don't need to right now.
Oh, I agree that I don't want somebody to jump through hoops, for something that they don't need to, but I also want to make sure that in our charge, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing.
I think we can set aside the letter. I agree. I don't think it's something that we should be responding to. But I've heard now, I guess 3 of our members expressed some uncertainty about this current status of proficiency testing for mixed interpretation. Now, maybe it's already fine in place. I don't think we know. It would be nice to find out what is being done. And I don't really want I don't expect a lengthy report from every lab, but I think some indication. I mean, is this something, which is there a group that's best placed to answer that question? Does the state police lab, for example, have a good handle on what's going on in the state, or for their own procedure?
We do have the biological technical working group, which is
Yes, well, maybe
the labs
that's
across the state and their folks, representatives from there.
That's great. Yeah, that's a good idea. So that seems like a group that's aware of the issues, and maybe a request to them to just inform us of New York State's approach to proficiency testing for interpreting mixtures. I mean,
So that's what the specific ask, though, is you want to better understand proficiency testing as it relates to mixture interpretation.
That's great. What is currently being done? I think that's the place to start.
And Bruce, I would add maybe any recommendations they have for moving forward.
Of course. I mean, they may say butt out, or they may welcome our interest. I think that's important. So, Dr. Souza, I'm looking on to you for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we ask is it called the Biological Working Committee?
You can call it the BioTwig, is what we call it, the technical working group, right?
The BioTwig in New York State to maybe give us an update on the proficiency testing that incorporates, if any, that incorporates probabilistic genotyping, and any suggestions they have as to how the DNA subcommittee could support the implementation, if possible, of proficiency tests.
Could we simplify that and just ask about mixture interpretation?
Can I ask something, though, not necessarily saying that incorporates probabilistic genotyping?
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
Just
leave that out.
mixture interpretation.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, mixture interpretation, yes.
Period.
Yeah.
Could I add one thing to what is their process? What is their whole program to establish proficiency of mixture interpretation? Because proficiency testing is a teeny bit of establishment of whether a person is proficient at doing those calls. So I think the laboratories probably already have thought through this, because it's on them to make sure that people have continual proficiency. And a test taken once a year or twice a year may or not actually establish that. So I think we need to make it a little bit broader. Because again, it gives a false weight to the one action of taking a proficiency test.
So do you have some language?
Yeah, just a little bit.
And also maybe their competency testing, how they competency test, their staff before even going online with regards to mixture interpretation.
Well, the competency testing, isn't that standardized in what they have to do in terms of you have to have a program, and your program needs to be it's scrutinized when A&AB comes in and takes a look at it.
Right.
I don't know how different those would be.
Yeah. I would agree how they demonstrate proficiency
Before going online with
well, that's competency. So before they go online, we're talking about demonstrating competency in it. But proficiency after that point, are we talking like, do they have 100% technical review? Is it also administratively reviewed? I mean, to me, that also speaks to the proficiency of an analyst, because they're being checked every case if they have 100% review. So I'm just trying to process, are we doing like a spreadsheet of this lab does this lab does this? I'm not sure how best to formalize this and make it a reasonable request for them to kind of speak to.
We also have collected the information they've already provided. So they've provided some of this in the information that we have and we're retaining that you will have. So again, is the cart before the horse. Do we have some of this information already provided by labs being stored for you?
Well, and also, I just want to also say, is it something that individually you research as to the proficiency test providers themselves? So CTS provides a 3-person mixture. So you know that's going to be the test that laboratories are receiving. So clearly they're receiving a 3-person mixture proficiency test. Perhaps their lab only allows them to call it to a 3-person mixture, then it's a moot point at that. So they're being tested proficient to what they're reporting out to. There's a lot to this, and I'm not quite sure what road we're going down, but I guess I don't want to be out on a limb here where Shelley and I are calling labs or calling meetings with BioTwigs and not understanding the intent behind it, when from a lab's perspective, they're kind of like, what are you talking about? We do this. Like, I don't know.
It seems like a good start would be to inquire with the proficiency test providers to find out what they're actually providing as mock evidence for proficiency testing.
Well, and also I think you have to take note that there are laboratory made proficiency tests that they would do also. I'm not sure of the frequency of that or what lab uses what program. Are they CTS providers? Are they, I don't know. Are they using forensic assurance? I don't know. I don't know who does proficiency tests across the board. I'm out of that game, been out of that game for a long time. So I'm not sure.
That would be good to know.
A research thing that then we would start with doing, or before we get to even asking labs for information. I'm not sure where we're going with this.
I think it would be good. It would lay the groundwork for then asking the labs, knowing what are they doing? Who is the proficiency test provider or providers? Whether they do make their own proficiency tests too. And do we know that what each lab does?
Shelley, do we get this on their annual?
So one of the things that the labs do provide annually with their performance declaration is their PT information. So we do have information regarding this. Right now, as the only staff member who, when we're fully staffed, it's a different story. There is only so much I can do, and this is, and now you all are talking about 8 labs. I'm talking about 20, and all of that information comes to us around March. So yes, we get information that would be useful in data mining, but please understand the time that's going to take.
Right, and we're down that side, down 3 people. So
it seems that we're concerned about analysts getting trained to interpret mixtures and then being assessed in their ability. I don't think
So Bruce, sorry. I'm really looking at legislation section 995B, and I don't know if it's how you article 49B, I guess. Chapter 18, Article 49B. I look at number 13C, and we're charged with specifically proficiency testing. And I just want to make sure that we are doing this. Someone has brought this to our attention, no matter how it came, that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing. I just want, that's what my ask is. How do we know that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing with regard to proficiency testing programs?
Thank you. So I think we'll bring this to a close if we can. Could we ask someone from the BioTwig to come to our next meeting and just give us an informal report and then get some sense of what they know, what they proceed. I'm reluctant to make a formal request for something which is sort of ill-defined, but I would like to hear from someone who's knowledgeable about what's going on in New York State labs. So maybe a representative from or several from the BioTwig who can come and discuss with us the training and assessment of training of mixture interpretation. And
this doesn't need to be a formal request though, right, Natasha? This can just be added to the next agenda, and it could be as simple as Shelley and I mining through their performance declarations and taking a look at it, and then maybe having a conversation with the BioTwig and getting back to folks.
I think we've got times on our side. I think we will be making some response to the NIST report at some stage, but this is preparation for that, I think.
Yeah, it's just informational at this stage, Jill. Just something back.
And I would like a discussion with someone from the BioTwig, and we could probe these issues, and we can get something, and then we can formulate make a more formal request for documentation. Does that sound like a reasonable approach? I think these are important issues, and I think it is within our scope.
And as far as us doing some research as well, I can see that CTS does an annual report. So I'm looking at their mixture proficiency from 2020. It looks like all the results that everyone reported are there in one PDF file. So it looks like it was a sperm and epithelial mixture, and it looks like a 2-person mixture, and you can see everybody's results. I don't see any way for people to report like their likelihood ratios. It looks like a yes/no kind of report, but I mean, this gives us a sense of what was available in 2020 anyway. And I know there are other providers. I don't know if they do the same. But.
So that was the testing provider you're referring to?
Yeah, this is on CTS's website. So I don't know if it's okay if I'm researching this real time while we're talking, and if I send it out to you all, I don't know if that's okay, but it's available.
Well, we could always look for ourselves as well. Yes. All right, so I think we'll bring this to a close. But thank you, in the first place, Dr. Reisman, and then Dr. Smith and Souza. So we're going to Jill. Are you clear what because I'm not, but what we would like? We would like discussion with BioTwig on the current state of training and assessment for mixture interpretation.
Understood.
And they could bring up things we haven't thought about. But we have a lot of things on our minds. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That was completes old business. Moving on to new business, we've got the 2021 annual lab summary. Jill, tell us about this. So the annual laboratory summary has been received by the commission.
Yeah, so the annual laboratory summary is a review of all the documentation pertinent to accreditation that has been submitted by the laboratories and tracked by our office, procedures and reviewed by the subcommittee and the commission. These represent the 8 labs that are conducting DNA testing, and we send that document out, have the labs review it, and they sign attestation saying yes, that was indeed what was viewed for the past year.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
I'll keep it short. I was just curious, is this a form, and then you as things are done, you keep OFS keeps up with it and just enters stuff in there, or is it all done at once and then sent out?
So I'll answer that if you're all right with that, Jill. So this is a document that we maintain throughout the course of the year. As information comes into us, we track it on this form. At the end of the year, we kind of finalize this document. We review what we've tracked. We send this out to the labs. They look at the same information, and then they send it back to us with their comments, or if there are no comments, they sign it. So it's a living document throughout the course of the year.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. So, Dr. Dooley, the annual code of security audit. Any updates on that?
So we have an annual regulatory obligation to perform these audits, and we do so each year. COVID, once again, has made this so that we are doing them remotely, or we had done them remotely last year, which is a document review and interaction with the laboratory, asking questions and getting clarification upon the final review of it. And then I take a look at it. Everyone is in compliance, and so I've issued a memo stating that to the subcommittee, as I am required to do every year.
Thank you. Thank you. So moving on, very interesting area of body fluid proteomics. Have some documentation from the OCME in the identification of the type of body fluid it is. So do we have someone who wants to tell us about this from the OCME?
We do. I believe that Dr. Siegel has joined us. I'm going to be sharing my screen with the presentation that they've provided. So give me 1 second here to get that.
Dr. Siegel and Tim Cooper-Schmidt, if you could star 3. It looks like Craig O'Connor also has raised his hand. We will unmute you so that you can speak during the presentation as needed. And Shelley will be getting that PowerPoint up for viewing. We also did send out a copy of the slides to the subcommittee members, so you should have the PowerPoint available to you as well if for some reason you can't see.
I don't think we need an extensive discussion, but it's certainly interesting, and a brief run through the slides would be good. So Dr. Siegel, are you going to run us through?
Yes.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice work you've done here.
Thank you, Dr. Weir and Shelley and the commissioners for inviting me to give this presentation. It's relatively short, and I'm open for all your questions. I just wanted to give you a little background about me and how this project started. So just who I am, I received my PhD in Department of Neuroscience and Biochemistry at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. I did my postdoc. Hold on 1 second. You can't hear me?
Yeah.
Can hear me. Okay, sorry. I was just giving some technical advice. So I received my my PhD in biochemistry, Department of Neuroscience. I did my postdoc at Rockefeller University in molecular genetics. I came to the OCME in 2007. And my current position is I'm principal scientist, and I lead the emerging technologies group at the OCME, and we are looking at proteomics as well as MPS for STR analysis. So that's me. The way this project began, it's been funded. The development of this project has been funded for several years by the NIJ. And they have been over the last, I looked it up recently, over the last 14 years, they've funded 32 grants at about $14 million to find a confirmatory test for body fluid identification. And at the OCME, we chose to work with proteins, and I'll get into why. This is not a technology that's new. It's being used in the clinic all the time. And there are other laboratories, forensics laboratories, that are looking at it. And so, for example, the Eric Merkley and Kristen Jarman at the Pacific Northwest Laboratories are using this technique for toxin identification. And they recently published a paper called Proteomics Goes to Court, a statistical foundation for forensics toxins in organisms. And the OCME last year published with NIJ Forensic Laboratory Needs Technology Working Group a white paper on this. So with that introduction, let me tell you a little bit about the assay. So why use proteins for mapping, for identifying body fluids? In 2014, you can see that the preliminary map of the human proteome was published in 2 papers in a single journal of Nature. More information has been accumulated since that time. Can we go to the next slide, please? And this is a figure from that paper, and what they showed was that different proteins are expressed in different tissues and body fluids, and that different body fluids and tissues can be identified by their protein profile. This went beyond just this image here. They actually showed they could distinguish between young adults, children, adults, but that's not for this conversation. On the left, you have a image of a protein from semen, seminogelin, and on the right, you have an image of hemoglobin from blood. Next slide, please, Shelley. So what are the criteria for an ideal protein body fluid assay? First of all, chiefly is specificity. We need to select proteins that are unique or highly expressed in each body fluid. Sensitivity, once we have selected the specific proteins, we need to choose those that are the most abundant. That gives us, of course, greater sensitivity. And then confidence. This is part of the assay that we developed here at the OCME, which has been validated. So we decided that to identify body fluids, unlike previous methods, proteins have been used for over 100 years for identifying body fluids. The problem was the assays were not confirmatory, where mass spectrometry actually sequences the proteins effectively, so you have a confirmatory answer. So rather than a single marker per body fluid, we chose to have multiple markers. So in blood, we have hemoglobin alpha, beta, and band-3 anion transport protein, which is a protein expressed on erythrocytes. Saliva, amylase, cystatin, leg-1 and histatin, and in semen, seminogelin 1 and 2, and protein-specific antigen. I should note that each of these proteins that are good markers for these body fluids are there because they have a specific function in those body fluids, right? So hemoglobin transports oxygen, amylase digests carbohydrates in saliva, and seminogelin 1 and 2 are important in reproduction. So they have a function there. Unlike DNA, which is present in all body fluids and all tissues, proteins are expressed mostly where they're needed. Next slide, please. So in addition to selecting 3 proteins or multiple proteins per body fluid, we also decided that it was not sufficient to find just one peptide in each protein. So for every protein, we tried to identify multiple peptides that could identify the protein, so we could be certain that we have identified that protein. And so if you look at amylase 1 in saliva, for example, there are 3 peptides listed there. One begins LS, the other AL, and the last one IY, and those 3 proteins need to be identified to say that we've identified amylase. And then the same thing with the other peptides, and all of them would be required to state that we have a positive result. I'd point out that histatin and leg-1, histatin is only one peptide. Leg-1 has a couple of peptides, but the ESP peptide that you see there is the only one that's easily identified. The others are very low abundant. They're probably pre-pro proteins, and they're lost in processing. And as you can see for semen and for blood, again, we have multiple peptides for each of the specific proteins that we're looking for in each body fluid. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to give an example of what this means. So here is a protein, a single protein. It's 462 amino acids long. It's seminogelin, and the sequence of this protein is on the bottom part of the screen, and it's in the single amino acid nomenclature, so you can see what the amino acids are. So after we digest the protein with trypsin, so the way the assay works is you extract your proteins, and then you digest them, and then you process them through chromatography and mass spectrometry. We would look for here these 3 specific peptides that came from this one protein, and we would do this with all of them. So this is just a random cartoon, but showing where these might come from. You can see on the bottom exactly where they come from. They're peptides that were easily identified of seminogelin in the assay. So those are the peptides we'd be looking for. Next slide. For this validation, we tried to follow SWGDAM guidelines for DNA as closely as possible. There are some differences, so it wasn't possible to do everything. And as you can see, we looked at sensitivity, accuracy, precision and repeatability, mixed samples, and number 5 is unique to this assay. It's non-targeted samples and sample degradation. And I just like to say non-targeted samples. Why did we do that? A lot of the proteins, for example, in saliva or any body fluid that's exposed to the outside, for example, vaginal fluid, there are proteins in there that have been evolutionarily expressed there as antimicrobial proteins. So in the nose and the vaginal fluid, any area that's open to the outside, you would find these proteins. So we wanted to confirm that the markers that we found we would not confuse any other body fluid with the 3 that we're looking at. So we used vaginal fluid from multiple women, and they were negative. We used non-human blood, mostly agricultural animals that would be found in a kitchen, beef, turkey, chicken, sheep, as well as dog and cat. And we actually used dog saliva. None of them were positive in the assay. We also used gorilla blood. And so there is a peptide that is expressed in humans that is not found in gorilla. So we could say that it was not a blood sample. With respect to degradation, samples that are degraded, protein samples that are degraded, are more easily detected than DNA, because when you do DNA amplification, if you don't have a full sequence between primers, obviously you're not going to find your marker. With proteins, it really is not that important. If there is a break in a protein, in a peptide, you can still find your markers of interest. And so we looked at degraded samples as well. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of the workflow. Starting at number 1, we receive a sample. We do a protein extraction. That takes about 30 minutes. We digest it overnight with trypsin. That's the longest part of the, first we quantify the amount of protein present in the extracted sample. That takes about an hour. And then we digest it overnight with trypsin, which is the longest part of the assay, and we're hoping to reduce that. There are new products available to 2 hours. So that's the quantitative part of the assay. Then we, once we have the digested proteins, we separate the peptides by HPLC, high performance liquid chromatography. They go into the mass spec, and then the data are analyzed by software on our computers. That takes 20 minutes per sample. Next slide, please. So the validation plan was broken into 2 parts. One is a quantitative part, which is protein quantitation. The other was validation of the body fluid marker identification, which is a classification assay, not a quantitative assay. So we did validation of both parts of this process. Next slide, please. And the validation, total number of samples we used was 2,600. For the protein quant, there was 1,476. And for the mass spectrometry classification assay, it was 1,124. As I mentioned, the assay is confirmatory. We can detect body fluids in the nanoliter level. I mean, we can detect, we typically load about 200 nanograms on an LC, but in a real life, to give you a better sense of what that means is it would be in the nanoliter range of blood, saliva, and semen are detectable by this assay. And as I mentioned, it's confirmatory because the proteins are sequenced and there's multiple proteins per body fluid and peptides per protein, and you saw that. And I think that is pretty much the end of the presentation. And I think the next slide is blank. So if there's any questions.
This is very impressive work, so thank you for that. So where are you up to in terms of casework?
So the validation has been completed. We handed it in to technical head and director, Dr. Kuferschmidt, and they are reviewing the documents, but it's basically finished.
This is Tim Kuferschmidt. I can answer perhaps.
Oh, thank you. Hey, Tim.
Hi. So yeah, it's been turned over to the Craig O'Connor, our technical leader, and his team, and they are going through it with a fine-tooth comb. We don't know yet when we will go online with it, but it will certainly be in this calendar year. So, you know, we're still working on, well, he's got to review everything with a fine-tooth comb, and we're working on an implementation plan, and I can talk about that if you're interested, but we're not yet online with it.
I think I'm more interested in knowing what exactly our role is formally. Jill, do we have a formal role here? I certainly appreciate the advice. What is our role here?
Well, I think this is kind of uncharted territory in terms of if it would fall under the DNA subcommittee or not. I believe that would be a discussion that you all could have.
There's some DNA behind protein sequences, so I would think so.
It's true.
But anyway, so if it was DNA related, what would our role be?
So once the validation is final, completed, and accepted, they would then put forth to the subcommittee for your review and binding recommendation for use.
Okay. So questions
Right,
or comments
Natasha?
from the...
I wait, let me just...
Sorry.
I always consult legal on that, right, Natasha?
Oh, you're correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So from the committee, comments or questions. So this is an advanced progress report, I would think.
I have a quick question regarding the peptides for detecting semen. How many females were tested? And what body fluids from females were tested? Because clearly P30 has been detected in females.
Sure.
So I'm just curious about that.
So blood and saliva were used from females, and there were hundreds. We ran the samples hundreds of times. There was, I forgot the total number of female versus male samples. They're in the 10s or 20s, I think, but they were run multiple times. We have, in in two of the grants that we just finished, we collected, for example, menstrual blood from 100 women in the second grant and 50 women in the first grant. We have those samples, and many of those samples we've run for the grant analysis. We're looking at eventually, it's not part of this validation, I want to make it clear, we're looking eventually to be able to distinguish menstrual blood from venous blood. So there, in terms of would a woman be positive for a sample from a woman be positive? For us to say that a sample is semen, because PSA is also found in men's blood, it's actually used as a poor clinical marker for prostate cancer. But if Seminogellin 1 and 2 are not there, and we found PSA, we would say the test is negative. Every protein and every peptide of every protein must be identified for us to say we found semen.
How many vaginal fluids did you test for semen, for the semen markers?
I don't remember offhand. We have all that in the validation. We have, from these previous grants, we have hundreds of samples of vaginal fluid, and we collected them not with swabs. We actually collected vaginal fluid and menstrual blood in menstrual cups. And so we were concerned that using a swab might not be sufficient to get a good representation of what's in vaginal fluid. So the vaginal fluid that we used actually was fluid that we used both neat and in mock samples. I don't remember the numbers offhand, but we can get those to you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Bruce,
Yes.
this is Mandy. I think that this is great work, and it's pretty exciting to see, starting at NIJ as research and then going to implementation. The only thing that I would say is that, and I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but since I've been on the commission, I hadn't gone back to look at what our charge was in a while. So, just having that fresh on my mind with proficiency testing, that if you're calling this DNA testing, then I would ask that if we are approving this testing, we should also consider what type of proficiency testing they may want to implement on this. And just add that if you look at relationship DNA testing, where some labs may be doing tests where proficiency tests are not offered, sometimes there's a sample exchange between two labs, and that's applicable in substitution of a proficiency test, at least in AABB accreditation, or at least it has been in the past. So, when we move forward with this, I think we should just be careful if we call it DNA testing or not. But I think it's great, and I really applaud the OCME for bringing this on.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that we can hear more, Tim. Great job, OCME. It's a good project. And though it's a little outside DNA per se, I'd like to have some more information on it. So if we're allowed to go forward with it, I would support that, finding out more.
Hi,
Thank you.
This is Craig O'Connor. Just to go back to Dr. Sozer's question, we are in the process of evaluating possible proficiency testing and vendors as you speak. The current vendors that we use do send us samples that are identified as blood and as semen, so we could use those as part of our testing. We are also looking at some vendors that do have some serology specific tests that have different bodily fluids. So along with reviewing the validation and signing off and coming up with some casework procedures, we are looking into proficiency tests as well.
Oh, great. That's fabulous.
Very good. Well, thank you once again, OCME team. Nice work, and I'm certainly personally would hope to see more of this, the opportunity to make a recommendation. So thank you. We'll move on. Thank you again. So familial search validation update, and Dr. Dooley, this impinges on the next agenda item. So do we have someone from the New York State Police Department online?
Yes. So the next item on our agenda is also laboratory disclosures, and it relates to that as well. So we're going to ask Russ Getting and Tom Leach to raise their hands so we can unmute them. Anyone else who doesn't need to be speaking, they can press *3 to unraise your hand, so the OCME folks can do that. We'll start with Russ, and he'll speak about the disclosure, which is item 6A on our agenda, and then how it relates to the familial search validation update.
Hello, this is Russ Gettig from the State Police Lab.
So help us change our gears from proteomics to familial calculations, please. Welcome.
So, want me to give you a rundown then on this disclosure?
Sure.
Okay, so in December of last year, one of our technical analysts was reviewing a kinship protocol that they had generated back in 2017. And in that, they had a mutation rate table that was transcribed from a publication. And what they noticed was that there was some errors in the mutation rate in that table. So we did a query. We don't use this that much, as far as we don't run into it that much with our paternity cases, but we did a query back and we only found one case that had used this particular mutation rate, which was for D1S1656. And when we looked at that report, the likelihood ratio for that was 164 million times more likely. And when we adjusted that and used the correct mutation rate, it was reduced to 99.64 million. It didn't affect any of the results. The final conclusion didn't affect the probability of paternity. So we then instituted a new kind of overall procedure where anytime we're transcribing a table like this into a protocol, that we have a second analyst confirm that those were entered correctly. So we did issue an amended report, which cited the correct, again, likelihood ratio.
So I just a little editorial comment. We don't know what the true mutation rates are. We have estimates and published estimates, which we should use. So if they were transcribed, that's an error. But I would try and avoid using the word the correct mutation rate. This is really a knowable quantity. We have estimates. So you should use the published estimates. So, but thank you.
Right. This came from a published paper by G et al.
Yeah. No, that's a good estimate, but it's an estimate.
Well, the interesting thing about it, when I was reading this, I was interested because I haven't seen published mutation rates for these newer markers. So I went to the paper and I was suspicious because the value is the same for all 5 markers. So what the authors of the paper recommended doing, because the data is not available, is taking the average of all the tetranucleotide markers and using it for these newer markers. So it's really an average of other markers anyway that's being used. So it's not even an estimate for these markers. So.
And of course, what we really need is an assessment of the effective mutation rate uncertainty on the final answer. So there's a lot of likelihood ratios. All estimates, they all use estimated quantity and they have a lot of variation. So we just need to keep in mind that there is no correct likelihood ratio. We've got our best efforts to give a number, and everything we put in there has uncertainty attached. That's not a criticism, it's just a comment.
No, thank you.
So this is the end of the matter on that item, is that correct?
Now we're going to talk about, right, so for the laboratory disclosure portion, that's right, but it also does relate to the familial search validation that was conducted. So we'll have Tom Leach speak about that and how it relates.
Okay.
Yes, good morning. Tom Leach, Associate Director up here in the New York State DNA Databank. As Russ had indicated when they identified this issue with the estimate of the mutation rate, the technical coordinator here in the DNA Databank that does the familial search validations had also used that estimated value for doing some of the statistical calculations in the familial search expansion validation for the 5 expanded loci. Again, the mutation rate that was used was for these loci was 0.00254. And what should have been listed was 0.00154. just wanted to note first that the reason we wanted to provide this information to the DNA subcommittee is that back last year, the DNA subcommittee reviewed the Familial Search expansion validation and had sent a binding recommendation to the commission, in which the commission also approved the use of the Familial Search expansion validation. So you had previously reviewed this. And however, we had not implemented this validation to date as of yet. So at no point was a familial search done and calculations used with this inaccurate or this different mutation rate that was identified. So no impact on any familial searches. However, we were working towards implementation of the work that is involved in this validation, and wanted to bring it to the attention of the DNA subcommittee because you had previously reviewed it, and certainly is related to the issue that Russ just discussed. So we, as part of our response here, we wanted to do some additional work, and an addendum was done to the Familial Search expansion, in which our technical coordinator, wrote up an explanation as to the fact that this different estimate for the mutation rate would have negligible effects on the work that was done as part of the Familial Search expansion validation. We wanted to provide that evaluation to you for your review and answer any questions that you may have. Dan Myers, our technical coordinator, is also on the line for any questions based on the addendum that was provided. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the committee? Certainly appreciate you bringing that to our attention.
So there is one more item with the state police, and that is just the second, which is closure of the non-conforming event that was reviewed in the November meeting and involved the inadvertent footnote omission of the population group on laboratory reports, and that's been closed out. So that documentation was provided, and it's for informational purposes.
Thank you. So that completes the that section. Well, thank you, New York State folks. So I think we have thank you. So we can move, I think, Jill, to our next item. The next item on the agenda is an executive session. So I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss matters relating to a current investigation or matters that may lead to the appointment, promotion, demotion, discipline, or suspension of a particular person. Do I have such a motion? To move into executive session.
So moved, Catherine Gettings.
Thank you, Dr. Gettings. A second.
I second Amanda Sozer.
Dr. Sozer, thank you. So we shall vote on that. My vote is aye. Dr. Beaver.
Ed Beaver, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Eastman.
Allison Eastman, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Gettings.
Catherine Gettings, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Smith.
Jennifer Smith, aye.
Thank you. Dr. Sozer.
Amanda Sozer, aye.
Motion passes. So at this point, if you're not a subcommittee member or staff, you'll be expelled from the virtual meeting and the streaming will be paused. The stream will resume when the executive session has ended.
It will take us a few minutes, so if anyone needs to turn their camera off and take a break, we'll resume. What do you say? 12:05? Is that?
Let's give 5 minutes. 12:01.
Yep.
12:01.
Be prompt.
Right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Correct. Thank you. We are now live on YouTube and we are also being recorded on WebEx.
Thank you. So the committee has returned from executive session. No actions were taken. So at this time, we'll move to adjournment. We have our next meeting scheduled for May 13th, 2022. Location to be determined, I assume, at this point. So at this point, before we finish, I'd like to say it was nice to see you all virtually. And thank you once again for taking part. I think it was an interesting meeting. So do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Please, from somebody.
So moved. I move to adjourn the meeting.
And a second.
Second, Catherine Gettings.
Thank you. So we should proceed to vote. My vote is aye. Dr. Beaver.
Beaver, aye.
Thank you, Dr. Eastman.
Allison Eastman, aye.
Thank you, Dr. Gettings.
Catherine Gettings, aye.
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Jennifer Smith, stay warm, everybody, and safe. Aye.
And Dr. Sozer.
Amanda Sozer, aye.
Well, I'm calling you, signing off from sunny Seattle, so enjoy the weather, you East Coasters. And we'll see you in May.